The autumn morning in Portland, Maine, carried a cool smell of fallen leaves as antique appraiser Sarah Mitchell stepped into the old Victorian house on Elm Street. The Whitmore estate sale had attracted collectors from all over New England, but Sarah's trained eye was quickly drawn to a small group of photographs placed on an ornate mahogany table. Among the sepia-toned portraits and family scenes, one photograph stood out to her. It was a formal studio portrait from 1914 showing a well-dressed family of four. A serious-looking father wore a dark suit. Beside him sat a woman in an elegant white blouse, her hair pinned in the popular Gibson girl style. Two young children stood close, a boy around 8 years old and a girl who could not have been more than 5. The photograph carried the embossed mark of Hartwell Studios in Boston, a sign it was taken at one of the city's most respected photography studios. The family looked comfortable and well off, their clothing suggesting upper-middle-class life in the years just before the war. Sarah lifted the silver frame and studied the image more carefully. The arrangement was normal for that time, the father standing behind his seated wife, the children placed neatly at their sides. Still, something about the mother's posture felt strange to Sarah, even though the rest of the family stared straight into the camera with the stiff expressions common in that era. The woman's left hand looked oddly placed, her fingers slightly curved as if she were hiding something. "Interesting piece, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. An elderly woman walked closer and introduced herself as Margaret Whitmore, the great-granddaughter of the home's original owners. "Do you know anything about this family?" Sarah asked, her professional curiosity growing. Margaret shook her head. The photograph came with other items they had inherited. "I believe it belonged to a family named Patterson. Other than that, I don't know their story." Sarah looked at the image again. That strange position of the mother's hand kept troubling her instincts. Back in her downtown Portland office, Sarah placed the photograph beneath her professional magnifying equipment. Years of working with antiques had taught her that important discoveries often hide in small details others ignore. As she adjusted the focus and light, the image became sharply clear. The father's mustache was neatly waxed, and the children's clothes looked clean and carefully pressed. But it was the mother's hand that captured all of Sarah's attention. Between the woman's fingers, barely noticeable before, was the edge of something white. It looked like paper, a small piece carefully hidden but not fully concealed from the camera. The way her fingers curved suggested she was holding it on purpose, perhaps hoping no one would notice during the formal sitting. Sarah's heart began to race. In her 15 years of appraising historical objects, she had learned that people often hid meaningful items in plain sight, especially during times of stress or fear. The year 1914 carried special weight. It marked the beginning of World War I, a period when families across America faced uncertainty and hard choices. Sarah photographed the detail with her high-resolution camera and enhanced the image on her computer. The white object became clearer, looking like folded paper, though its message was still unknown. Sarah picked up her phone and called her colleague, Dr. James Reed, a historian who specialized in early 20th century American social history at the University of Southern Maine. "James, I have something you might find interesting," she said, her voice filled with the excitement she always felt when uncovering a possible mystery. "It's a 1914 family portrait, but the mother is hiding something in her hand, something she didn't want seen, yet couldn't let go of." "Send me the images," James replied right away. 1914 was a turning point. Families were dealing with money troubles and the threat of war. Whatever she was hiding could tell an important story. Dr. James Reed examined the high-resolution images Sarah had sent. His trained historian's mind quickly understood the possible importance of the hidden object. Studio portraits in 1914 were carefully planned. Nothing appeared by accident. "The Hartwell Studios mark is our first real clue," James explained when they met at the university. Theodore Hartwell ran one of Boston's most exclusive studios from 1895 to 1925. If his records still exist, they might tell us who this family was. James had already spent the morning calling Boston historical societies and archives. The Massachusetts Historical Society confirmed they had received Hartwell's business records in 1967, including appointment books and client details. "I'm driving to Boston tomorrow," Sarah said firmly. "This mystery won't solve itself." The next morning, Sarah found herself inside the climate-controlled archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society. The Hartwell Studios collection filled 3 large boxes containing appointment ledgers, client letters, and photographic plates. She opened a 1914 appointment book and slowly scanned the entries. Under March 15, 1914, she found it. Patterson family portrait, 2 RPM. Payment $12.50, premium sitting. The entry also listed an address, 145 Beacon Street, Boston. The note about a premium sitting suggested a wealthy family able to afford Hartwell's highest-priced service. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she photographed the entry. The next step would be learning more about the Patterson family, but she felt she was close to uncovering something important. A librarian approached her table. "Finding what you were looking for?" she asked. "I think so," Sarah replied. "Now I need to find out who the Pattersons were and what a mother might have felt." She needed to hide in her hand during what should have been a happy family portrait. The weight of the mystery stayed with her as she prepared to dig deeper into the family's past. The genealogy department of the Boston Public Library became Sarah's next stop. Using the address from Hartwell's records, she began building the Patterson family history through city directories, census records, and old newspapers. The 1910 census listed the family clearly. Thomas Patterson, age 42, was recorded as a textile merchant. His wife Eleanor was 36, their son William was 8, and their daughter Catherine was 5. The family employed 2 servants, showing their wealth during Boston's booming textile industry. Thomas Patterson owned Patterson and Associates, a successful textile importing business with connections to mills across New England. The company dealt in fine fabrics from Europe, making the Pattersons respected members of Boston's merchant class. But as Sarah continued reading newspapers from 1914, troubling details emerged. A small notice in the Boston Globe from February 1914 mentioned that Patterson and Associates faced difficulties due to changing European trade conditions. Even more alarming was a report in the Boston Herald dated March 10, 1914, just 5 days before the family portrait. It stated that local textile merchant Thomas Patterson had been questioned by federal investigators over suspected problems with import documents. Sarah felt her RT pound. The family had paid for an expensive portrait while under federal investigation. This new context changed everything about Eleanor Patterson's hidden object. What had she held in her hand during what might have been their last portrait as a respected Boston family? A reference librarian, noticing Sarah's intense focus, leaned closer. "Are you researching the Patterson textile scandal?" she asked softly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "You know about it?" "It's a well-known case study," the librarian replied. Thomas Patterson was convicted of customs fraud in 1915. The family lost everything: their house, the business, their social position. She paused before adding, "Eleanor Patterson disappeared shortly after the trial. Some believed she fled to Canada with the children. Others thought something darker had happened." Sarah felt a chill run through her. Whatever Eleanor Patterson had hidden in her hand during that March 1914 portrait now seemed far more meaningful than a simple family keepsake. Sarah's research next took her to the National Archives branch in Boston, where federal court records from 1914 and 1915 were stored. The Patterson case file was thick, filled with investigation reports, witness statements, and evidence lists. The case against Thomas Patterson revealed a complicated scheme of customs fraud that lasted 3 years. He had been underreporting the value of imported textiles, avoiding thousands of dollars in federal tariffs. The plan involved fake documents and bribes to port officials. But as Sarah read deeper, she found something unexpected. Federal agents suspected Eleanor Patterson was more than just an innocent wife. A Treasury Department memo dated March 8, 1914 stated, "Evidence suggests Mrs. Eleanor Patterson maintained separate financial records and correspondence related to the import scheme." Recommend immediate search of family residence. The search was scheduled for March 16, 1914, one day after the family portrait. Sarah's pulse raced as the timing became clear. Eleanor Patterson knew federal agents were about to search their home. The family portrait taken on March 15th was not just a formal photograph, it was taken on the final day of the life they had known. In the evidence inventory from the March 16th search, Sarah found a final and haunting detail: searched premises thoroughly. No additional documentation recovered. The note read that the subject may have destroyed or hidden important materials before the search. The picture was starting to make sense. Eleanor Patterson had concealed something in her hand during the portrait, possibly evidence she could not bring herself to destroy, yet did not dare leave inside the house. The photograph itself may have been her way of keeping proof of what she was trying to protect. A folder marked unrecovered evidence caught Sarah's eye. Inside it, she found a handwritten note from the lead investigator. It stated that Mrs. Patterson claimed she knew nothing about her husband's actions, but witness reports suggested she had been present at several questionable meetings with foreign contacts. Her understanding of the family's finances appeared deep and detailed. Sarah photographed every useful document, her thoughts racing as she wondered what Eleanor Patterson had hidden that March afternoon in 1914. Court transcripts from Thomas Patterson's 1915 trial gave Sarah a troubling view of the family's final months. Eleanor Patterson had testified briefly for her husband, insisting she was innocent and unaware of the customs fraud. But even more revealing were witness statements buried deep in the files. Margaret Donnelly, the family's former housekeeper, had given testimony that was never presented in court. She said Mrs. Patterson was always writing letters, often to people overseas. She kept a special writing box that she locked and hid. In the weeks before Mr. Patterson's arrest, she burned many papers in the fireplace. Another witness, a neighbor named Robert Sinclair, described unusual behavior. He said that the night before the portrait was taken, he saw Mrs. Patterson in her garden close to midnight. She appeared to be burying something under the rose bushes. The most chilling account came from Catherine Patterson's schoolteacher, Miss Helen Rogers. After Mr. Patterson's arrest, Eleanor came to take Catherine out of school. She looked distressed and kept repeating, "I have to protect what matters most. That was the last time anyone at the school saw either the mother or the daughter." Sarah's research into Eleanor's disappearance showed that she and the children vanished in April 1915, shortly after Thomas's conviction. Police reports said they left the Beacon Street home with only personal items and no forwarding address. William Patterson, the 8-year-old son, was briefly enrolled in a school in Burlington, Vermont in May 1915, but records showed the family left after only 2 weeks. After that, the trail completely disappeared. The Boston Police Department opened a missing persons investigation but later concluded that Eleanor likely fled to escape the scandal and possible charges of her own. There was no evidence of violence. As Sarah read the final police report dated December 1915, one sentence stood out. Mrs. Patterson's disappearance appears voluntary. However, her knowledge of her husband's crimes and possible possession of undiscovered evidence makes her a person of continued interest to federal authorities. Whatever Eleanor Patterson had hidden in her hand in 1914 had clearly been important enough to risk everything to protect it. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. While researching Eleanor Patterson's disappearance, she had posted questions on several genealogy websites. 3 days after her visit to the Boston Archives, she received an email from a woman named Ruth Caldwell in Burlington, Vermont. The message read, "I believe my grandmother may have been Catherine Patterson. She always said her real name was Catherine, but she used the name Carol Caldwell for most of her life. She died in 1995, but she left behind items that may interest you, including what she called her mother's secret." Sarah immediately called Ruth, her hands shaking as she dialed. Ruth was a retired teacher in her 70s and the granddaughter of the little girl in the 1914 photograph. During their phone call, Ruth explained that her grandmother rarely spoke about her early childhood. She said her father had been involved in serious trouble and that her mother had saved important papers. She kept a small metal box her entire life, saying it contained proof of the truth. Ruth agreed to meet Sarah the next day in Burlington. That night, Sarah barely slept, wondering what Eleanor Patterson's secret might finally reveal after more than 100 years. The next morning, inside Ruth's warm Burlington home, Sarah saw Catherine Patterson's legacy at last. The metal box was small, about the size of a jewelry case, with the initials EP engraved on the lid, Eleanor Patterson. Inside, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, were several items: a letter addressed to Catherine, a small photograph, and 3 folded documents that looked official. "Grandmother made me promise to keep these safe," Ruth said quietly. "She always said that one day someone would come searching for the truth about what really happened to her family. She believed her mother was innocent and that her father had been protecting someone else." Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter Eleanor had written to her daughter. The handwriting was graceful but rushed, and the date read March 15, 1914, the same day as the family portrait. The letter began, "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally come to light." With Ruth's permission, Sarah read the letter aloud, both women listening closely to every word from the past. Eleanor wrote that Catherine's father was not the criminal the government believed him to be. The true person behind the customs fraud was his business partner, Jonathan Harwick, who had used Thomas's name and forged his signature for more than 2 years. She explained that she had proof of Jonathan's guilt, including letters between him and corrupt port officials, forged documents and financial records showing payments from accounts Thomas did not know existed. Jonathan had threatened the family when Thomas began asking questions. He warned that if they exposed him, he would make sure Thomas was convicted of crimes that could lead to prison or worse. Eleanor wrote that the family portrait they took that day might be their last. Hidden in her hand was the key to a safety deposit box at the First National Bank of Boston, box number 247. Inside that box was all the evidence needed to prove Thomas's innocence and Jonathan's guilt. She wrote that she could not risk keeping the documents in their home because she knew federal agents would search it. If anything happened to her or Thomas, Catherine was to retrieve the evidence when she was old enough. The bank manager, Charles Whitman, was a trusted family friend who knew the truth and would help when the time came. Eleanor explained that Thomas chose to protect his family rather than fight charges he knew were false. He believed accepting blame would keep them safe from Jonathan's threats, but she could not allow an innocent man's name to be destroyed forever. She ended the letter by telling Catherine that courage sometimes means protecting the truth until the right moment arrives. Sarah felt tears fill her eyes as she finished reading. The hidden key in Eleanor's hand had not been proof of guilt, it was proof of innocence, carefully preserved for more than a century. Ruth wiped her eyes and said her grandmother always believed her mother had been brave. She kept the letter her whole life, waiting for someone who cared enough to uncover the truth. The next morning, Sarah and Ruth drove together to Boston, the metal box secured carefully in Sarah's briefcase. The First National Bank of Boston no longer existed as it once had, but records showed that old safety deposit boxes had been transferred to the main downtown branch. Bank manager Jennifer Walsh listened carefully as Sarah explained the history behind their request. Although safety deposit box 247 had remained sealed for more than a century due to unpaid fees, the bank's legal team confirmed that Catherine Patterson's daughter, as Eleanor's next of kin, had the right to open it. Walsh admitted the case was unusual, but with proper documents they could move forward. Inside the vault, safety deposit box 247 sat among many forgotten boxes. When Walsh inserted the key Eleanor had hidden in her hand in 1914, it turned easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Inside were the documents Eleanor had described, letters between Jonathan Harwick and corrupt port officials, bank records proving bribes, and practice pages showing Harwick learning to forge Thomas Patterson's signature. There was also a letter from Harwick to Eleanor dated March 5, 1914, clearly threatening her family if Thomas continued asking questions. Ruth held one of the papers. Her grandmother's story finally confirmed. She said her grandmother had been right all along. Her mother truly had been protecting the truth. Sarah photographed everything, already thinking about how to share this discovery with the world. Thomas Patterson had been innocent, taking the blame to keep his family safe. Eleanor Patterson had not been a partner in crime, but a mother guarding the truth for the future. One final item lay inside the box, another photograph. It showed Thomas Patterson and Jonathan Harwick at their textile business, smiling and shaking hands, a painful image given what followed. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Massachusetts Historical Society, presenting her findings to historians, genealogists, and newly discovered members of the Patterson family. The documents from Safety Deposit Box 247 had been reviewed by experts who confirmed the authenticity of the forged signatures and evidence. The story gained national attention, becoming a powerful example of how historical wrongs can be corrected. While Thomas Patterson could not be formally cleared due to the passage of time, his conviction was officially recognized as a miscarriage of justice. More importantly, the Patterson family name was restored in the historical record. Ruth Caldwell donated Eleanor's letter and the contents of the safety deposit box to the Massachusetts Historical Society, ensuring future researchers could learn from this story of courage and truth. Dr. James Reed later confirmed that Jonathan Harwick had fled to South America in 1916, strongly supporting Eleanor's account. As Sarah ended her presentation, she displayed the original 1914 photograph beside Eleanor's letter. She reminded the audience that photographs are more than images. They are frozen moments filled with stories waiting to be uncovered. Eleanor Patterson's hidden key was not just a secret, it was a mother's determination to protect the truth for future generations. In the audience, Ruth smiled through tears, finally seeing her grandmother's lifelong faith in her mother's story proven true. The little girl in the 1914 photograph had grown up carrying her mother's secret. Now, more than a century later, that secret had restored her family's honor. The once ordinary family portrait had become a lasting reminder of love, sacrifice, and the quiet power of truth hidden in plain sight.